what did you go out to see? You see, what happened was that John the Baptist was in prison. He sent some of his disciples to Jesus to ask Jesus, are you the one who was supposed to come? You know what happens when you're going through stress, when you're going through a difficult time? You really begin to doubt whether in fact what you've done is right or not. And John the Baptist, in this sense, he began to doubt. He began to wonder whether in fact all he had stood for was right or wrong. And so he sent a message with some of his disciples to Jesus, and he asked them, he said, go and ask Jesus if he's the real one, or should we wait for another one? And so Jesus sent back a message to them. And then he said, as these men were going away, Jesus began to speak to the crowds about John. What did you go out into the wilderness to see? A reed shaken by the wind? This is the first, I believe, the first feature of greatness. The first feature of greatness is out here, and that is simply, just a minute. Could I have the next slide, please? Destination for greatness. How do we connect with this whole thing? Okay? You're destined for greatness. I believe that God has destined that He gives you His greatness. He shares this greatness with you. The first thing which I'd like you to know is that God doesn't sponsor flops. He doesn't sponsor losers and failures. You may feel like one. You may feel you've been struggling through life. I've been a student myself. I've studied a lot, studied in universities, studied in different places. And everywhere I've gone, I've found these students who struggle along like that. And you may think you're one of them. But this evening, and as we're celebrating this time, I want you to make a silent prayer in your heart to Jesus and say, Lord, I know that you don't sponsor flops. I want you to come into my heart. Okay? God has planned, greatness planned for us, as the next point shows us there. Greatness is not, the next point there is, you know, you may be thinking that, like I pointed out in the previous slide, I said, what is greatness? Greatness is being born into a big family or something. It's not that at all. Okay? You can be born into very big families. I've seen some very people who've been born in very great families, but who've never really made it properly at all. They've been failures, actually. But I believe that what is great is somebody who takes what he has to start with and then takes it on to a new level, moves it on to an impossible level, and that is what I spell as greatness. So greatness for you also is the same. You need not think that you've been born into a small family. You need not think that you've been born into simple surroundings. You need not think that you don't have much to start with. Okay? Just take that for you is that God wants you to be great. Just like He destined, just like He sent Jesus to become a man so that we can connect with Jesus and we can also share in this greatness. John the Baptist shared in this greatness, and we too can share in this greatness. I believe that Jesus... Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. Whenever you want to talk something good about a person, you talk those good things when that person is facing you, when that person is with you. In the presence of that person, you usually talk those good things. What happens when that person turns his back? When that person turns his back, you start talking what you don't want him to hear. This is natural. This is the natural thing that most people do. But we find that when it says in verse 7 here, as these men were going away, Jesus began to speak to the crowds about John. What did you go out into the wilderness to see? Jesus began to talk about John's greatness when the men had gone away. In other words, John would never hear what Jesus said about him. And this is the beauty about it. Maybe you've been thinking that, oh, I've got to do something fantastic and then only people will see it and then. But I want you to know that greatness is what God sees in you and not what men measure. Men's measure is different. They will talk something good about you today. Tomorrow they may run you down. You know full well that you live in a competitive world. Things are changing. You're trying to make the best of it all. But very often it doesn't work that way. And so the safest and the best thing in life is to measure your greatness by what God has given you and by what God has said about greatness. And that's why we find some great things out here. The next point, please. God looks at the depths of our heart and motives rather than a few shadows that pass over. Maybe you've had a few glitches in your life. Maybe you've had a few failures in your life. Maybe you've had a few things that have made you to stumble. You don't have to worry about that. This evening, as you come to know Jesus, as you hear about Jesus, as you call on Him, I'm sure that He will forgive you. He has the ability, He has the power, and He desires to welcome you into His kingdom. What did Jesus say? The first measure of greatness, the next slide please. The first measure of greatness is strong conviction. Okay? So on one end, I have set out what the world calls greatness. Greatness is being born into a great family. Greatness is making a big buck. Greatness is getting a big education. Greatness is success in business, and so on. But there's another side to greatness which I want to present to you, and this is what Jesus had to say here. Okay? Jesus